The world around us is hostile to the Word of God and to biblical values, but we are called to be salt and light, to stand for truth in a decaying culture. We are not called to run from the fire, but be willing to step into the fire. God has placed you at this time in history on purpose and for a purpose. Join us as we get better equipped to address civics and culture from a biblical worldview. Welcome to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church. Let's welcome our hosts Alison Furno and Debi Vandenboom.
Today's topic is equipping the next generation with a biblical worldview. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Tracy Munsil. She is the Executive Director of the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University, also where I went to school. Dr. Tracy, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
Yes, I'm so excited. And I want to start off with, you are so interesting. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and some of your background.
Okay. Wow. Where do I start? My story is I went to Arizona State University, got radically saved there by my English professor, my Milton professor of all things, which completely changed the trajectory of my life. Met my husband there. We got married shortly after graduation. He and I have 8 kids. We homeschool our kids. In fact, we know Debi from that context in terms of homeschooling, and she's a little bit behind where we are. You will get done. You will survive
I'm
it.
done now. Actually,
You're my hero. But it was during those homeschooling years that I really fell in love with biblical worldview. We were trying to figure out how to homeschool, how to educate our oldest kids. And I love ideas, so great books. And then I was like, how do I teach those? And so I started teaching those to a co-op of about 50 students through a biblical worldview lens. And that's where the rest of my journey kind of took off. I went and got my doctorate in political science because I wanted to teach at the college level. And from there, started working on biblical worldview materials that we use throughout the curriculum at Arizona Christian University. So kind of a winding road. God has been good and has just taken me through a lot of different things. Obviously, raising kids and having grandkids.
Got a whole brood of those.
A whole brood of those, yeah. And so it's interesting. I don't think my life is that interesting. I just live it and try to be faithful to God. And so if I can serve anyone else or be interesting to anyone else, that's a blessing. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So you work with students on a daily basis. Do Millennials and Gen Z, all of these younger people, do they care about a biblical worldview? Do they care about civics at all?
Well, I'm gonna take your first one first in terms of civics and political engagement, because we have at the Cultural Research Center, we do quite a bit of research into biblical worldview and the intersection of faith and culture. And we just did a huge millennial study, probably about 3 years ago now, and asked those very questions. Are you interested in politics? Are you interested in civics engagement? And I'm just going to go to my notes for just a minute and share some data with you, because we actually found it fairly surprising in terms of not political engagement, and they don't really call it civic engagement. They prefer to look at it as social and community engagement. In fact, at the time,
this is through the Barna, right?
Right, through the Cultural
Barna.
Research Center. Yeah, Dr. George Barna is our director of research. He's been doing research for more than 40 years into biblical worldview and faith and culture, and really set the standard in the research community for measuring biblical worldview in America.
And that's housed now at ACU,
it is,
right?
Yeah, for 5 years. In fact, I was pulled out of the classroom. I'd been in a classroom for 10 years teaching the next generation political science and politics and worldview. And when we met back up with Dr. Barna, we have a long relationship with him that kind of came full circle. We met back up with him at a gathering for ACU. And that's where the Cultural Research Center was birthed. He just went, I love what you're doing. I've been looking for a biblical worldview institution of higher education. And the first thing we had him do when he came in was create a survey and assessment of our students' worldview. So our freshmen, when they first come in, before they even step Fun on Campus, they take a biblical worldview assessment, and then they take it every year after that and upon graduation, because we want to make sure that what we're doing in the classroom not only affirms the values that they bring in with them, but also develops and deepens their worldview while they're at ACU. And we want to be able to tell parents we're doing what we're saying we're doing. And a famous kind of George Barna-ism is you don't get what you don't measure.
Wow.
And so the first thing we did was measure our own students, and then we have research projects that are more nationally situated.
Yeah, sorry. I just go. You can get back to that.
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
wanted
I'm
to
glad
set,
you asked.
I just wanted to
Yeah,
set that framework
yeah.
before you get into these
Absolutely.
about where this is coming from, like where this information is.
Right, and this was one of he does we do an annual study of the worldview of American adults, and this was a special project that we did. We have a number of kind of supporters who are really interested in this particular issue. Where are millennials, and how are they doing as a generation? To your question of civic engagement, about half the generation says they're active in their community. In the last month, they'd been active in their community, volunteering or donating money. About half said that they had boycotted products or services based on the political stance or the stance that the businesses had taken. They were engaging in dialogue on moral, social, and political issues. This was kind of stunning. 1/3 of the group had personally participated in some type of civil protest activity in the past month. So they're very engaged in their communities, not really politically though. And I don't know how you define civic engagement, but I would think voting and that would be part of that. They're still the least likely generation to be registered to vote, the millennials. Even though there was an uptick in voting numbers, they're still least likely to be registered to vote. And they don't see themselves as patriotic. In fact, they reject that term. And they have a generally negative view of the United States of America and democracy, almost like 2-to-1 negative to positive, which was stunning. And Gen Z is very similar in terms of very active. They share the millennial mindset. Top values are belonging, comfort, non-discrimination, kindness, happiness, justice, diversity, convenience, and expression. And they're very motivated to bring about change. In fact, 75% of them say that they are social activists.
Interesting.
And 64% are angry about the condition of America. And another 60% are not excited about the future of America, the future of the country that they're going to be inheriting. So that's kind of the landscape in terms of very engaged, motivated for change, and but it not really moving into in a same civic political area, but going more community and justice issues and things like that.
So they're seeing that's really interesting to hear all that stuff together. I hadn't heard all those things together in one thing, but that they're cause oriented and justice, and so that's all the social justice stuff really speaks to them. But they're not making that connection of how they're feeling dissatisfied with America, but they don't connect that to we vote for who runs America.
Right.
So there's some kind of a disconnect there with them thinking that boycotting and doing protesting and all those things are creating a change, but then they're not realizing that there's a change that needs to be made in getting engaged in the voting and the running for office and talking to elected officials who make those decisions. So that's an interesting dynamic to look at.
And I know when I first started teaching at Arizona Christian University, I started the political science program there, Arizona Christian. And I remember one time coming into a classroom, and on the billboard and the blackboard it says "Christians stay out of politics."
Wow!
I'm like, this is my tribe. So we had a lot of work to do, but I think that there is kind of a pushback in younger generations because of what they've seen unfold in the political realm, that they've chosen other paths for engagement.
Well, and do you think this is just was not a planned question, but because I hear this a lot so I have my kids are all in that age range, right? They're from 17 to 27. So I hear this a lot from my youngest one, who's 17 and is very engaged in everything, but she's one of the things that she has said is that they're very in tune to hypocrisy, and they see like they want authenticity. And you and I have talked about this too, Alison, about wanting that authenticity. And so I think I'm just thinking out loud that it seems like a lot of the political activity and the things of seeing people talking in Congress, it's very hypocritical, because they say one thing but they do something else, and it just feels really phony. And so I think that may be part of the turnoff. If I had to try to get into that mindset of like they want to have that. They feel like they're being more authentic, and that there's something kind of, hypocritical or phony about the political realm.
And I think they probably saw their parents very engaged, at least Christian kids, in the political realm, and trying to navigate that and make sense of that, how you do that. And one of the other findings was the millennials are very conflict averse. Mm-hmm. And so the overwhelming majority said that they would avoid interacting with somebody that would cause tension or conflict or adversarial. Right. So I'm like, that's the political world right there in terms of, waiting in there.
Go to an LD meeting.
Yeah, yeah, I'm going tonight. Anyway, but there's, so I think that if their values are comfort, and the political realm is a very, very uncomfortable place in a lot of ways. And so I even get cynical as I watch it. And sometimes I have to just take a step back and realize it's not even about any one political victory or defeat. It really is about going deeper and winning the culture. And I think we get so caught up in kind of the R versus D and the numbers and the polling that we really miss the point that we all want to have a better culture. We all want to have a better country. And I think that's the real positive about young people is they see all that we're seeing. They're just taking a different avenue that they think is going to fix it. And I'm not sure it is.
I do think social media plays a huge role in not wanting conflict.
Oh,
because if you think about it, you watch stuff on social media, you see what you like and you don't like, and you become more comfortable picking and choosing what pieces you want to think about, you want to see.
Right, exactly.
And they talk about, and actually, I don't know if I've talked about this, but Instagram now has political settings on sensitive automatically. So Instagram and these social media platforms are censoring it and being open about it, saying, hey, you probably don't want to see political content, so we're going to keep it off. And that is a big part in due to that, wanting that comfort, wanting that just stability and not having to think about. That was a big thing with previous elections that I've seen with younger people. And this one upcoming too, right? Think of all the fighting that happens, first of all. Yeah. And the thought that my world could be shook if the wrong person gets elected is a thought that makes me not want to be involved in politics. Right. And so I think that is a big piece.
Yeah. And I think that I'm like, I have to be involved. Right. Yeah. So I flip it over completely differently. Right.
Well, and if we're in any of the political meetings or whatever, it's the older people that are yelling at each other and doing all this stuff. And so if you look at that, where it's like, okay, the younger generations want the relationship and want a cause and a story, right, to follow, rather than the fighting and the arguing and the.
That's the thing. I feel like in most political settings, you see no action items. What am I actually supposed to do about this? If there's no solution, then why are we going to be in this uncomfortable environment of fighting?
6 hours.
Right, of uncomfortable, and so if you're thinking about it, like for me, once I knew that I could make a difference and I knew how I could make a difference and it was simple and it was easy, I was like, oh, well, I want to be involved because I care about my community. Right. But I think that is a big gap.
It'd be a different strategy to reach younger
people.
Yeah,
and I would say too that the issues that we're looking at and what kind of media and our cultural messengers focus on are what's going on in Washington, the national level.
Right.
And you do feel helpless.
Yes.
Right.
Like my vote doesn't even count. It's so big. And there are a lot of other levels that actually have more influence and more effect on how you live your daily lives than the national government does. But our whole national focus has shifted that way. Right. And certainly, I mean, we don't need that's not what the the founders intended. In fact, they intended us to be involved at the local level, the state level, and the federal government to be really, really small and have no tentacles into our lives at all.
Right.
And so the whole system has kind of been flipped over. And what does it mean to be a citizen? What does it mean to be engaged? What are your avenues for engagement? Those just seem so much more difficult than they really are.
So I want to shift this a little bit because I think this is such an interesting conversation we're going on where, millennials and Gen Z, they have this different view of culture and politics and all of this stuff. But we've also seen a shift in other areas of their lives where there's a lack of meaning and purpose.
Right.
Where does that come from?
Well, again, from our millennial research, we found that 75% of millennials, so 3/5 of that generation says, and this is they're volunteering this. Our guess is that the numbers are probably higher, volunteer or say that they lack meaning and purpose in their life, 75%. And I think my kids are bookend millennials, and so they're all in the millennial generation. I can't even imagine that. Young people having no reason to get out of bed in the morning.
Right.
And you kind of take a step back, and you asked me about worldview and biblical worldview in the next generation. It's about 2% among Gen Z and millennials. So 2% of millennials and Gen Z actually have a biblical worldview that they live off of. So you ask about meaning and purpose. Their only real options are to find meaning and purpose in temporal things, which we know don't last. We know don't bring happiness. And so there's kind of this catch-22. They've rejected the God of the universe that can bring meaning and purpose to their lives. Right. And yet God has wired us for meaning and purpose. And so
we're trying to fill it with other things.
Things. And when we were talking about kind of the appeal of justice issues and climate change and even the Palestinian issue right now, it's something that seems noble and bigger than they are. So it's almost like the closest thing they can get to like a godlike purpose,
right?
Without really any avenue or knowledge or I mean, you talk to the average student, not at Arizona Christian University, but other universities, they haven't been to church. They don't know anything about God. They, other than the very stereotypical negative view of Christians as judgmental, and the Bible is this harsh set of rules, and so it's a conundrum. It's a catch-22 in terms of without that avenue open, they're going to continue to search for meaning and purpose.
Right. And I hear all the time from younger people that I know don't attend church. The number one thing they say is, I don't deserve to go to church. Aww. I don't. And it's terrible. It's really, they say, I do too many bad things. There's no way I could walk into that building and feel okay with myself.
Wow.
And it's tough because I'm like, oh my gosh, it's, it's the opposite of what you're thinking. Like, This is where we go to find healing, to get better. All of us have issues and problems, but
that's eye-opening. That's really eye-opening to me in terms of kind of how do you then redirect,
right?
And maybe not to the building, but to the person of Jesus. That, in fact, our millennial study showed they don't like church, they don't like pastors. They don't even like the Bible, but they like Jesus. They think he's pretty cool. So that might be an avenue in.
You know what? I think it's because Jesus is the most relatable.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's true,
And because when you think about pastors, they're often not relatable. When you think about churches and buildings you walk in, and you can walk into a church and hear a message and be by yourself and feel completely empty because you don't have that relationship with God, right?
Right.
And so it makes sense to me that there's that feeling of, I want to really know somebody at a personal level.
Right.
And I think that often, because Christians know this is what's good for you, this is what's going to make you happy and satisfied in the long run, they will, they go to those rules and those regulations, but a lot of times in the name of God, they will push people so far where kids are like, I don't want anything to do with this.
Right. Yeah. And so kind of strategies for our generation. Listen more, talk less. Walk alongside young people, get to know them, be friends, have a relationship with them, and don't lead with scripture. Lead with your heart. Like who can I mentor? Who can I reach out to? Who can I see around me? 75% of the young people around us are looking for what we have, and so how can we connect with them?
Right. And I know we talked about this a little bit, that for younger people, it's kind of uncomfortable to talk to somebody who's well accomplished or like your teacher, your professor, because you're like, they don't want to talk to me. Like they know way more than I know. I don't even know how I got out of bed this morning,
Yeah.
And so I think, what was great about going to Arizona Christian was I did get to talk to my professors more, and I would go up to them and I'd be like, hey, can I have coffee with you? And I'd be terrified.
Yeah.
I would literally be terrified. But after a while, it helps to, obviously continually have those conversations. But my point is, if younger people can get used to, remember that people that are older than you are still normal people,
most of us,
most of us,
Not always.
Not always. But I got used to asking questions. I would just be like, hey, Debbie, I have no idea how to do this. Can you help me? And then she would laugh and be like, yeah. And, and it's just once you learn how to do that, you're like, oh, it's not that bad. Okay.
Yeah. And as a professor, sometimes I would feel the same thing about students going like, do I say something? Do I venture in? Can I ask them if I can pray for them? I mean, if a student walks into the class and they had a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, they're having a rough day, it's all over their face.
Right.
So just like you took a first move, I think our generation has the onus to take the first move too.
Yeah,
Even though for us, we're like, they'll just see us as old. What do we have to share? They don't want anything from us. It's the same mindset, only in reverse. And so I think relationally, both sides can make a lot of strides and really make a big change.
Well, and I think what you're saying, it's true. I know it's true for me, right? That and because we have, you don't have to be on a university campus to have this. Right?
Oh, heavens no.
We have people of that. I'm Gen Z age, and so we have people at church, where you work, at your, in your neighborhood, whatever. We all have exposure, right, to people of younger generations, and I think that a lot of times what I've found, because I do a lot with the teenagers and the young adults here at church, and it's so funny because I'm not super cool or whatever, but they don't care. They really don't. They just want to know that you care about what happens to them.
Yes.
It's building those relationships, and you don't have, so I think a lot of times the older generations, right, we feel like they're not going to want to talk to us because we're not cool and in on all the whatever the new things are, but they really genuinely don't care if you are nice to them and you care about them, and they can see that you care what happens to them and you'll talk to them.
Yeah.
You can build those relationships with people and not have to worry about all of that, and then it does open that door.
Yeah, and in reality, all of that is important, but the bottom line is our generation has a much higher level of biblical worldview and biblical knowledge than the younger generation. And they're not going to get that in the culture. They're not going to get it from anywhere around them. And so it's really important that we take those first steps.
And Titus, it talks about training those younger generations, that it's our responsibility as older men and women to train the younger men and women on how to operate in that biblical worldview, that it's our responsibility to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that going back to the meaning and purpose piece, whether you're a coach or a teacher or you're dealing with this younger generation, I kind of want to ask the question to both of you too. I'm thinking through this as a coach. How do you, when you see this in your classroom, you see that there's students that don't care, that are checked out. They're there for a reason, but they have that lack of meaning and purpose. How can you, as a professor, help that?
Ask them. Ask them why you're here. Challenge them.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how old athletes you're working with, but there are all kinds of ways. And just a question: how's your day today? You look like you're tired. I had one student who worked a late overnight security shift, and for a whole lot of different reasons. And he would come into class, front of the classroom, just like sleeping. I like jostle him, and he goes, "Oh, it's not you, it's not you." And afterwards, I just kind of chatted with him and found out the story of why he was doing the overnight shift and the financial issues that he was dealing with, and that just gave me an opening. So pay attention. Students are young people send you cues all the time. And so pray and engage, ask the questions.
That's so good, being open to paying attention to that, right? Because you could very easily be in your own world and thinking about grading or whatever else, but having that moment where you're like, okay, I care enough to look outside of myself and say, what are you going through right now?
Right.
That's huge. And just kind of to your point, Debbie, showing people that you care, I think is the first and pivotal piece for people to open up to you and to be willing to open up to you.
Or to have those conversations, right? And also, to, thinking about that, excuse me, the situation you were just talking about, rather than judging and thinking, oh, well, they just don't care and they're a bad student or flunk them, right?
Not a chance.
No, really though. I mean, because that I think a lot of times is our natural, inclination is to just judge, like, oh, well, they're write off all of the Gen Z or write off all the millennials because they're hopeless, right? But it's taking that moment to try to see what is actually going on with that student and why are they feeling that way. And I think that's true of, if any situation, it's like you're making that personal connection to find out what is your story, why are you, really, honestly, that's what Jesus did, right? Is getting that personal connection, and then the healing came, and then the worldview comes, and the all of that, comes from that relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's real helpful to not assume bad motives.
Right.
To assume 75% are lacking meaning and purpose. That 98% don't have a biblical worldview. That's what you have to assume. Not all of the negatives that you see in the research about Gen Z and millennials. They're my favorite generations, by the way. Yeah. They're going to save the world.
Right.
And just an amazing generation to work with. I feel very privileged. But again, those statistics show something that they don't want us to see. And so you just assume that, not the negative.
Well, and that really is on us, right? It's on us that it's they don't just get that way on their, it's like, it was our job to make sure that those, it goes back to Titus, right? The book of Titus, where it's our job as the older generations to train up. So if we're at a point where 75% have no purpose and 98% have no biblical worldview, well, we can jump in and try to help correct that course of the ship,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I do think it I think it sets kind of the course and the agenda for what we do in the future. I think we're learning a lot by looking at Gen Z and the millennial generation and asking the question, why don't they have a biblical worldview? They were very church. They're a church generation. So what's the disconnect? And how can we make sure it doesn't happen in the next generation of children? That's imperative, and that's what we're really focusing on in terms of, what are the best strategies for making sure that the next generation who are now kids and preteens actually have a biblical worldview.
Right.
And not that it's a panacea or a magic pill, but all the research shows that if you have a biblical worldview, you're more likely to flourish, be happier in your relationships, have meaning and purpose, all those things that make human life better and make communities better. And so it's just so key that we help those who are a little bit older to shore up their worldview, but then really focus on the youth. Because Dr. Barna's research shows that your worldview is basically formed by the age of 13.
Wow.
So once they're into the high school ministries and into high school, the research shows that most Americans die with the same worldview they had when they were a teenager.
Wow.
Yeah, so
That's
those
crazy.
are such key years. And so we're really trying to take that message to churches and schools and parents. And again, even when you look at biblical worldview and how do you make that work, that's discipleship.
Right.
And discipleship is basically relationship but built on the Bible and built on the relationship of Jesus.
Right.
And so it's not rocket science what we have to do. We just have to do it.
Right.
And the relationship building is what creates the relatability, right?
Right.
Yeah. And I was going to say, people listening, if you have older kids, not have hope, because you and I, Tracy, both got saved as adults, right? So you were talking about getting saved as an adult. My worldview is nothing like it was when I was a teenager because of getting saved as an adult. So there's always hope.
Right.
But it is those early years are crucial, that if you have kids or grandkids, or nieces and nephews, or students or whoever in that age range, that is really a pivotal time to try to get that Christian worldview, the biblical worldview.
Yeah. And the research shows just the influence of grandparents is just phenomenal in terms of being able to talk about Jesus in ways that parents don't necessarily do that.
Right.
And so that's really important. But so important to be doing those things.
I think what you both are touching on is really cool, because I was just thinking back to when I was in college and I took my first government class. And you know how much I paid attention in that class? Not one bit. Because I remember going in there, I'm like, what does this have to do with me? Why would I let government, what is that? It's like politics. It's like, what is this, right? And it was because I did not understand that it affects my daily life, that it affects my taxes, it affects my day-to-day stuff. And I think biblical worldview and politics is this in the same way. There are people that are like, oh, I'm just not political. I don't care about that stuff. It's like, well, you care when you have to pay your taxes at the end of the year.
Or if the garbage doesn't get picked up.
Right.
Or you don't have any water.
Right.
Or there's no library for your kids.
Right.
Yes.
Or your kids are being
Or we go
taught
to
all
war.
kinds of stuff.
I mean, all those things.
Right.
Big things, little things, yes.
Right. You care about minimum wage. You care about, So I think the key piece here with both of these topics is the relatability piece, and how can we find that community-oriented thing that isn't political, but it's grounded in something where they feel that sense of meaning and building with the people around them. So I think this is a really good conversation. I love all of your data and statistics. It's so interesting and really helpful for us in the future and everything that we're doing. Yeah, I have one more question for you. And, this is kind of geared more towards the political realm. So you've been watching politics for a long time. How have things changed, and what are you hopeful about?
I think my husband, we've been watching politics for 40 years since our college days, and we knew it was going this direction in terms of kind of on the losing team for 40 years is what it feels like. If you look at the whole stretch of those 4 decades. But I think the thing that surprises us the most is the speed at which these changes have occurred over the last few years. And I think in the gender area, in terms of even what's going on college campuses, I think that my generation is kind of looking at it and go, what? How did that happen so fast? And it's been building for a long time, but it has seemed like it's really accelerated to the point that for me, we can't keep going the way we're going. No political fix is going to, nothing political is going to fix this.
Yes.
I mean, there are things we can do stopgap wise. Obviously, every election matters. Better to put good people in than not. Those are so important. But at this point, we have to play a longer game. We have to win the culture, not just a political battle. We have to rebuild. I know at Arizona Christian University, we are praying for revival. I mean, that's how I came to a biblical worldview. In college, there was a mini revival on campus among campus leaders, and I was just swept up in it and went, of course. And so we've been praying that for 40 years, but we've really been praying now that we're in a university setting, that God would just move in your generation. I have a lot of friends whose kids went away to secular colleges and have walked away from their faith. I call them the prodigals. Right. And I have a prayer burden for prodigals in the millennial and Gen Z generation. And the truth is there. What I always pray for them is that in their quiet moment, not when they're looking at the politics of it, not when they're thinking about the pastor that gives them gives them the creeps or all the negative things, the judgment and all that. They just remember the first time they met Jesus.
Right.
That sweet, innocent, real faith. Because I know all of my kids went through it. I know all of my friends. I have a really good friend. I can still see her face, her and I just talking about where our kids were, and she was just weeping over the loss of her daughter to the culture. And we thought we were doing everything right. And so, double down on the prayer for this generation, double down on loving them. I'm really, really optimistic about your generation. We're starting to see it. You're really encouraging, and know that you're not alone. I mean, we're sending out lots of students. There are other Christian colleges doing the same thing. When I'm in the classroom, my sense of what God is doing in your generation is raising up a generation of leaders quickly, because he's going to need you, because he's not going to waste any time. He loves your generation so much. He loves the world so much that he doesn't want us to continue in the direction that we're going. He wants things turned around, and he wants revival. And my hope is in your generation. So that's why I keep working.
I love that.
I'm not going to retire and go off to the golf course and in despair. I mean, we have a lot of work to do, and what you guys are doing is really important.
Awesome. I love that so much. Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was a really good conversation. I love this, and I think it's going to help a lot of people. Thank you for listening to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church.
You can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify, and follow us on social media. Find all the info on the show notes. To learn more about Dream City Church, visit our website at dreamcitychurch.us. Thanks for listening.